Welcome to a very special series presented by GayTalkRadio.org and QueerPublicRadio.com. In this series, Gay Talk Radio and Queer Public Radio will feature the complete audiobook Invisible Hand, written by Larry K. Mason. Although this audiobook is a fictional account, it could be true. Mr. Mason has designed this concept of a completely new monetary system which would, by itself, catapult the world into a caring, loving environment that we have all dreamed of. To explain his concept, Mr. Mason wrote this book and provides it for free on the internet. Mr. Mason decided to write this book, Invisible Hand, to explain the new system he proposes, which has the ability to change our world as we now know it. With his permission, Gay Talk Radio and Queer Public Radio present this wonderful concept for your listening pleasure and serious consideration. For more information, you may visit Mr. Mason's website at nopom.info. That's NOPOMINFO. nopom.info. On with the show.
Invisible Hand, Chapter 20, Takeover, in which control of the computer system is seized. Saturday, January the 19th, 2013. In the twilight of a machine room control center, a computer system administrator is on the phone to one of her colleagues. Well, it's definite. These are not the programs we were supposed to be running. Cindy has found the backdoor that was used on her system, and it looks like the same backdoor exists on my system, but they use a different backdoor on my system. There's no telling how many there are. Have everybody copy this new version as part of their regular backups, then install it on some other machines not on the network. Then we can feed it some of the traffic that's been coming in the last few days, a little at a time, and see what input causes the compromises. If we do that on all the centers, we should be able to find most of the backdoors. Second, we're going to have to replace this bogus software with the good stuff and do repeated tripwires several times a day to find if anything changes and what changes it. If we go down to replace the software at one center at a time, the other centers will refuse to accept the change just like they're supposed to. They'll kick that one center out and not accept it back unless it's just like the others. So we have to do them all, or almost all, at the same time. Also, to be sure the hackers don't prevent that, we'll have to power down at the same time, get off the network, come up with the original software, and then get back on the network at pretty much the same time to reestablish the service. I think all that is going to take most of a day to do. So, when do you think we could do it? I'd say not before next week at the earliest. Yeah, me too. We'll check with Cindy because she's probably going to have the most problems with her boss. Well, when is he out? Okay. Fine, let's do it that day if we can. Tuesday, January 22nd, 2013. Sir, I definitely think they're planning something. They're talking about replacing code and powering down. They're going to do something big on February the 2nd. Groundhog Day? You've got to be kidding. What's Groundhog Day got to do with anything? I don't know. Maybe because it's a Saturday. What do you think they're up to? I think they're going to shut down every center at the same time, replace the software that's on their systems now with that older version, and then come up all at once without our code in their systems. So what? We just put our changes back after they come back up. But they must know we compromised their systems. They'll have found at least some of our backdoors and such and removed them. We may not be able to get back into their systems at all. I thought you said our programs remove their tracks. You can't remove all traces if they're monitoring everything. They can keep track of everything the CPU does and all input that comes in over the network. You can't bypass everything. You mean they could lock us out? Well, yes, I guess you could put it that way. Damn, I'll have to get the boss in on this one. Friday, February 1st, 2013. Did you get paid yet? Sure, didn't you? Sure, but I got some kind of bonus, I guess. It's a lot more than I was getting before. Didn't you ask the computer what you were paid for? I asked, and it said I got paid for crowd control mostly. There were a bunch of things, but that was the biggest. They must have liked the fact that nobody got hurt and there wasn't any riot at the drugstore. What are you going to use the money for? I'm saving up for a new boat. If we get paid like this every week, it won't take long at all. I'm going to pay for a private school for Leroy. He's in the 3rd grade now, and he still can't even read at 1st grade level. You don't have to pay for that. That's education. It's supposed to be free. Have you talked to the private school yet? No. Are you sure it's free? I mean, public school is supposed to be free, but I thought private school was supposed to be a luxury. All education is free, even for adults. It's like anybody can set up their own public school now and accept anybody that wants to enroll. My wife's going to take some courses at the business college. I sure hope you're right. I'll check it out. 7 p.m., Friday, February 1st, 2013. What are we supposed to go to the computer center for? They say there was a conspiracy of the operators there. They're trying to take over the computer for some reason. You mean they're going to pay themselves a lot and keep it secret? I guess so. The boss didn't say. What are we supposed to do? We aren't programmers. We're supposed to arrest the guys that work there. All of them? Yeah, all of them. Anybody we find there. We're supposed to bring them back here and hold them. Back here? This isn't a jail. And who's going to run the computers? That's not our problem. Just get your stuff and come on. Just a minute. I got to go to the bathroom. Okay, but hurry up. We're supposed to be there in an hour. We're meeting the other guys downstairs. Remember, you're just a payer. We don't have to wait for you. If you can't keep up, we'll just leave you behind. Okay, I'll keep up, but it'll be easier if I can get rid of some of dinner first. 7:10 p.m., Friday, February 1st, 2013. The FBI is coming to arrest us? Why? Rip didn't say. He just said that they'd get here within an hour or so. What are you going to do? I'm going to get to work early. She pressed the buttons on her phone, paused, and said, Cindy, it's hitting the fan. The FBI is coming for us. And if they're coming for us, they're probably hitting all the centers. We're going to have to do it now, ready or not. You're probably the most vulnerable from what you told me about your boss. It's your choice, of course, whether you risk it. I'll call the others and spread the word. She pressed buttons again, paused, and said, Security, the FBI is going to try to arrest everyone at the center. No, we don't know why, but we think it's part of a plot to take over the money system. Get all the security you can find and guard the place from anyone you don't know, especially if they claim to be federal government. I'll be there as soon as I can. Then she began quickly making calls to other centers. 7:20 p.m., Friday, February 1st, 2013. Look at it this way. Let's assume that the order actually is from higher headquarters rather than some bizarre practical joke. We're talking about the money computers. If one center starts showing different values than some other center, then that one is isolated and ignored by the grid while its problem is found and fixed. So if a renegade group of programmers tried to take over a single center to make themselves rich, it wouldn't work, right? Right, reluctantly. So it doesn't make sense that it would be necessary for the FBI to arrest everyone at the center right away on an emergency basis before warrants can be arranged, does it? After all, what horrible action could just one center take that would justify circumventing the law? Therefore, it must be that all the center's personnel are being arrested. If that is the case, then it must be some plot by all the programmers and all the staff of all the centers. But that doesn't make sense either, does it? No, those folks would be obvious if they suddenly showed up rich. They would convict themselves if they tried such a thing. They would never get away with it. But even if they tried, that would still not be an emergency, right? Okay, I see what you mean. So the crime being committed must be in the issuing of the command to you. If you obey that command, you will be doing more harm than good. There's no immediate threat that would justify acting without warrants, and there is no crime specified in your orders. You'd be a fool to obey those orders. I guess so. You're going to have to do more than guess. You're going to have to act. 8:03 p.m., Friday, February 1st, 2013. We are agents of the federal government. You have no right to keep us out. Stand aside. You got a warrant? You got any authorization that says I have to let you in here? I don't even let payers in here unless I know them, and I don't know you from Adam. What's your name? Let me see some identification. Look at the badge on my shirt. Look at the name tag. See there? It says Fred Gunderson. Now you know all you need to know about me." The standoff had just begun, but already it showed signs of being a long one. The 6 FBI agents and the 2 payers that accompanied them were faced by 4 uniformed security guards, 1 payer, and several local police. The head of the FBI party was the upset, well-dressed, dignified-looking man who was about to burst a blood vessel. At his side, a payer, dressed in tan pants and a white shirt, was trying to reason with him. "Jerry, you don't have warrants, do you? You were just supposed to arrest people you found here with no indication of what crime had been committed or anything. I don't think that's legal, Jerry. I can't pay you for doing something that's illegal, can I now?" "Shut up, old man," Jerry said to the payer, then turned to the guard at the gate and said, "We'll be back with warrants, and you'll let us in if you know what's good for you." 9:30 p.m., Friday, February 1st, 2013. "The FBI's trying to do what? Why would they want to take over the money computers?" "Our sources don't know, but it looks like it's happening all over the country. Do we print this or let it slide?" The editor paused then, put his head in his hands, and slumped over his desk. After a few moments, his back straightened, and when he dropped his hands, his face was rather grim. "Print it. I'll be out of the office with a terrible headache. I'll be looking for a drugstore that's open. My head is hurting so bad that I can't think, so even if I call and say to kill this story, print it anyway and get it on the front page. Have it delivered if at all possible, you understand?" "Yes, I think I do understand. Sorry about your headache. Wish I knew of a drugstore open in the area, but with your head hurting so bad, I don't think you should be driving. Also, I think I'll put this item on the wire just in case some of the other papers haven't got it yet. Oh, and I sure hope you don't forget to take your cell phone with you. It would be unfortunate if we couldn't get in touch with you for a couple of hours." 9:10 a.m., Saturday, February 2nd, 2013. "Daddy, can I have the big one in the green dress?" "Sure, honey. It's your birthday, and I told you you could have whatever you wanted as long as it doesn't cost more than $50. Here, I'll get it down for you, and you can carry it to the clerk for yourself." "She's almost as big as me, isn't she, Daddy?" "Yes, dear. She can be your big sister." "I don't want her to be a big sister, Daddy. I'm 6 now. I want a little sister. She's just 5, and I'm her big sister." "You sure are, dear. You're a big girl now. Can you put your little sister on the counter all by yourself?" "Yes, Daddy." "That will be $42, sir." "Aren't you the pretty one? Is it a special present just for you?" "Yes, ma'am. It's my birthday. I'm 6. "I want to buy this doll." There was no response from the terminal. "What happened? It's supposed to talk back to me, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. I don't understand. Computer? Computer?" "It isn't responding. Let me get this keyboard." The clerk pulls a keyboard up from below the counter and types the keys quickly. And she pauses, types some more, and shakes her head. This computer's fine, but it's not connecting to the central computer. Wait a minute." She types still more. "No, it's gone. I'm sorry. It should be up in a few minutes. Would you like to wait?" "What's wrong, Daddy? Can I have the doll now? Please, Daddy, can I?" "No, dear. There's something wrong with the computer. We'll come back Monday and get the doll. Mama's waiting for us right now." "But it's my birthday, Daddy, and I want the doll right now. You said I could have it now, Daddy." "Tell you what we can do, sir. I'll just record your voice saying you'll come in Monday and pay for the doll, and then the birthday girl can play with it right away. Would that be all right?" "Say yes, Daddy." "Thanks very much. Yes, that would be fine. What do I say?" The clerk brought out a device that looked like a cell phone, pressed a couple of keys, and held it out to Daddy. "Just say you want to buy this item number here." "I am Julian Martinez, and I want to buy item number, and I'll come back tomorrow to pay for it." "That should do it. Please bring this label with you when you come in. I don't think the birthday girl will miss that." "Let's go show Mommy my new dolly. Come on, Daddy." 11:05 a.m., Saturday, February 2nd, 2013. 3 out of 60? You mean we only got 3 centers out of 60? That's only 5%. What kind of incompetent agents have we got working for us anyway? Well, in some cases, the agents wouldn't even try. In others, the word leaked and the centers wouldn't let them in. Since they didn't want a gun battle, the agents backed off. In one case, there was some gunplay, and the agents killed 2 guards to get in. The programmers hit the emergency power down button, and every computer switch, disk drive, and phone in the whole place went dead. The 3 centers we did get are stone cold. What about the others? Can we get the local police to help? I don't think so. In most places, the police are guarding the centers by now. In a few places, the police are staying out of it, but every center has at least some civilians who are coming in to join the center guards. We're going to need to use some military force to take these places. Damn. That means authorization from the secretary. Well, what must be done? 1:40 p.m., Saturday, February 2nd, 2013. What do you mean we need to shut down the phone system? Are you out of your mind? We can't do that. Well, we can, but... Sir, we have half the country talking about the attempted takeover of the computer centers. We can't tell the plotters from the busybodies and the gossipers. Even our military installations are being flooded with calls about it. I'm not sure the troops are going to cooperate on this one. If we don't shut down the phones, the centers will be able to stay in touch with each other and coordinate their actions. They can rouse support. Even the payers are telling each other to get people to help the centers. Why didn't the monitoring software stop them? I thought we were listening to every phone conversation in the country by our computers. I thought we were watching everybody. How could they pay us without us knowing about it? Well, you see, sir, computers are really stupid. I mean, they can do some things really fast, but they can't distinguish plotting from other conversations. The only reason we spotted it at all was we put some warning thresholds in place for the centers that would set off alarms if certain words were used very often. Then we knew they were talking about security, but they do that all the time. It could have been some security problems that had nothing to do with us. By the time we established that they were detecting our programs, it was too late. They just kept ahead of us. But why were we detected in the first place? I mean, we would have known if some manager put the kind of monitoring that caught us on the work schedule, but none of them did. So why did those programmers do all that extra checking? I mean, it must have been quite a lot of work to write all those programs. Yes, sir, but it seems that the payers told them they'd be paid a lot for preventing hacking and break-ins and such. They were doing it on their own. They weren't told to do it. Of course, some of them do that sort of thing for fun. They are geeks, you know, sir. Well, why did the FBI agents refuse to arrest the center personnel at so many centers? I thought they were highly disciplined. We've been looking into that also, sir. It seems that they thought it wasn't the right thing to do. They thought the payers wouldn't like it if they took over the money computers. They didn't think they'd be paid if they did. It looks like we've lost control. If we try to send in the military and they don't go, then we ourselves will go next. It's time for spin. Yes, Mr. President. Here's what we'll have to do. We'll say that the programs were just to monitor the money computers and were not intended as a means to cheat or control the payments. We'll say that some junior administrator panicked when he saw the monitoring programs being detected and tried to stop it by asking the FBI to intervene. We'll say that for the good of the nation, someone has to monitor the functioning of the money computers, and we are the people's elected representatives who are best qualified to do the job. This isn't a disaster, it's just a setback. We're still in charge here. Mr. President, we have more problems than the computers. You remember that I told you that lots of the agencies have been losing personnel? Well, it's been getting worse rather than slowing. We've been promising them pay in euros in some cases, but they say there isn't anything for them to do now, and they aren't getting paid at all. When the payers made deposits on their usual payday, the 1st of February, they didn't get paid, and lots of their friends did get paid. They're beginning to quit in very large numbers, sir. Well, I can't blame them. I'd want to get paid, too. Sir, the worst of it is, it's the secretary types and the lower-level people who are quitting the most. We could get along okay if it were the department heads or middle managers who were quitting, but when all the secretaries in an office quit within a week of each other, the office just stops functioning. What can we offer them to get them back? That's just it, sir. There isn't anything we can offer them. We don't have anywhere near enough currency from other nations to pay with that, and we don't have any mechanism to distribute it if we did have the currency. Well, what about the industrialists? Do we still control the company heads and the media types? No, sir. We don't have the staff to monitor them anymore. I mean, the computers are still putting the information in the databases, and I can still listen into almost any boardroom in the country, but without the staff, there won't be anything I can do. Right now, we're getting by on residual fear and respect. If they ever find out we can't do anything to them, they'll be out of control altogether. 3:15 p.m. Saturday, February 2nd, 2013. Conference call of all 60 Money Computer Center directors. So we are agreed. All the code running on the money servers will be open. Anybody can look at the source. Anybody that finds a bug or a vulnerability and lets us know about it, the payers say will deserve to be paid. We all match code and install at the same time. Now, about detecting the next attack. We need to monitor every byte that comes in and every byte that goes out. It'll slow us down some, but we have plenty of time. I think every center should do its own testing in its own way. We don't want to all do exactly the same things because that would be too easy to breach. What worked one place would work everywhere. Third, for physical security, we need to have better defenses. The center should be on camera in lots of places and be hardened. We can't do this ourselves, but we hope the payers will agree that we don't want a few gangs of thugs to be able to take over the centers. Finally, we call for a national investigation of how such activities could be considered appropriate for this administration. Invisible Hand, Chapter 21, Applying for Work, in which Enid finds something for Neil to do. Neil was rather looking forward to his next encounter with Enid. She'd taken his mind quite off the threat posed by the computer system. But whenever he went into the living room and saw that TV screen on the wall, the memory of the danger returned. He still needed to think. Everything that Enid had talked about had some surface plausibility to it, but it was just theory and philosophy. In the real world, if you put 10 people to work on the same project together and didn't organize them, you'd get chaos. That or some natural leader would emerge and dominate the rest. Just look at boys' neighborhood gangs. There was always a leader, wasn't there? Sure there was. Some kid would be the boss, and woe to any underling who didn't toe the line. Enid tried to make him think that somehow this new money business changed human nature. But people were still competitive and selfish and territorial, regardless of what kind of money they used. There just couldn't be any way that the folks who controlled the computers wouldn't use that control to make people toe the line. She could talk independence all she wanted, but that didn't make it true. A job was just a job, no matter what kind of fancy talk she used to dress it up. She could go on about how people worked with other people, but Neil knew there had to be a boss, and bosses were the same the world over. If he argued with her, it would just put her back up, and she wouldn't help him find a job. As old as she was, she had to have contacts all over this town. He'd play along and see what she could do for him. On his way to Enid's, he saw the boy from yesterday pulling his wagon with several sacks in it. Neil shouted hello at the boy and got a wave and a hi in return. That kid really ought to be in school, he thought. He's being seduced away from school by this money thing. The payers would pay anybody, even if they were underage. They ought to do something about it, pass a law or something. Well, it wasn't his boy, and he'd probably not be in town for long anyway. Still and all. Enid was on the porch again with the dirty plate, glass, and silverware on a small table beside her. Apparently, she even lunched on the porch. "Good afternoon, Miss Lee. Ready to go back to work?" Neil used a big smile with that one, hoping to start out on her good side. "Good afternoon, Mr. Campbell. Indeed I am. Shall we go inside this time?" "Well, I must have come up in the world. An invitation into Miss Lee's parlor is not to be sneezed at. May I bring the dishes?" "You may. Just put them in the sink. I'll get to them later." Neil put the dirty dishes in an otherwise immaculate kitchen and returned to the living room that functioned as her office. "Step over here to the computer and see what I found for you." Neil joined Enid in front of the TV, which was displaying several entries. "Several of these are just farmhand work. You'd get a strong back, but you really wouldn't learn much about your new situation. The next grouping represents work to be done in some of the local stores. I think they would require a bit more knowledge of how we do things than you have at present, so let's bypass them for the time being. Most of the work providing services is completely beyond you. Of course, you could probably offer to teach whatever languages they have in Afghanistan or wherever it is you were working before, but I don't think there's much market for that here. Your best bet would appear to be as a driver for the TDP plant. That has several advantages. One is that you won't have to know much about the economy, and the other is that if you ask a few innocent questions, you can find out quite a lot about the local people. Nothing like getting to know the people you live among. Yes, it does seem to fit my needs rather well. I thought we were going to let you see my work reputation. Very good, Neil. You're learning. Now let's see if you can figure out why I gave you this information without seeing your history. Back to school. I knew I should have read the assignment. Well, let's see. If you ask to see the information first, that would indicate a lack of trust on your part. Why do I have to trust you? I don't need anything from you. You need me to do a good job or it'll hurt your reputation. I know that much. It'll hurt my reputation only if I recommend you. Merely letting you see these work opportunities would hardly be held against me, as you could have easily found them for yourself by asking your computer. Okay, then. How about you gave me the information because it isn't any good to me unless you recommend me, so you were risking nothing? Much better. At least it reveals some knowledge. But though it was a safe thing for me to do, what gain is there in it for me? She was peering at him over her spectacles. Neil took quite a while considering, and then said, thoughtfully as if thinking aloud, "You're trying to teach me about attitude toward work. That attitude is one of cooperation, of independence, of understanding one's role. I must take responsibility for my actions. I must not wait for others to tell me what to do. I must take initiative for myself. I already knew you needed my work history for a recommendation, so I must take the initiative to offer it rather than waiting for you to demand it. If you were to demand it, you would be acting to force me to give you the information. You would be taking the role of boss rather than being given that role. So you are waiting for me to show that I have learned to take responsibility for myself rather than passively waiting for you to direct me." Neil finished in something of a triumphant rush, feeling a little proud of himself. "Mr. Campbell, you do seem to be learning. Okay, let's see that work history." Neil, half expecting it to fail, addressed the TV. "Jeeves, please make available to Ms. Lee my work history." "Very good, sir." It worked. How did Jeeves get to Mrs. Lee's TV? He would have to investigate that later. The display this time included items for the declarations from the Middle East. As usual, it included his account total, but it also indicated each payment and the rationale given for the payment. There was some description of the nature of the work, though it didn't go into detail. "Looks like you had some responsible positions, indications of honesty in the face of temptation, a certain amount of unexpected ingenuity. You seem to do better when you were on your own with just general objectives rather than narrow limits and detailed directions. Yes, I think you are qualified to drive a garbage truck." Neil almost fell off the couch with that last line. "A garbage truck? What kind of a job is this, anyway?" "Neil, it isn't a job at all. It's an opportunity for you to work with some other people. You'll be meeting a lot of people for whom you'll be doing favors by taking away things they want to get rid of. You'll see all kinds of people engaged in all kinds of work. You'll drive all over this part of the county. You'll be on your own in a lot of ways, but your contribution will be obvious. You'll also be able to easily trace the consequences of your actions so that you should be able to show your stuff if you have the right stuff." A garbage truck. You really want me to start at the bottom, don't you? "Neil, there is no bottom. You're self-employed. You're an independent entrepreneur. Nobody is better than you. Nobody is your boss. You're dependent upon no one on earth. In other words, you're just like everybody else." Neil caught the bus the next morning to ride the 2 miles out of town to the TDP plant. The plant covered several acres, and there were several trucks of various kinds parked around the main building. Several large storage tanks at one end of the plant appeared to be for oil and natural gas. The office, according to the sign, was in a separate building, and Neil reported in at the front desk. The person behind the desk was a young woman of about 18 or 19 years wearing a ponytail and jeans. Neil said, "I'm Neil Campbell. That's Niall, pronounced Neil or Nile. I was told there was work here I might do." "What did you have in mind?" "Oh, I'm Jessica Fontaine. Pleased to meet you." "I was told you could use another truck driver out here." "Sure, we could always use another driver. Do you have a truck?" "Well, no. I assumed that someone here might be able to provide a truck for me to use." "Some of the guys should be in shortly. Maybe one of them will have something for you. You can wait over there if you like." Neil shrugged and walked over to the 2 chairs near a coffee maker by a sink. There was a box with about 10 homemade donuts, some packets of fake cream, and others of sugar. Between the chairs there was a small table with some magazines on it. Lacking anything else to do, he picked up one of the magazines, which had a football player on the cover. He started to thumb through it. The first thing that struck him was that there were no ads. The photographs showed some game action and close-ups of faces, but everything on every page was about the sport. According to the date, it looked like the magazine had been printed several months ago when the football season had been in full swing. He read some of the articles and learned that neither the college nor the pro game had changed much. They were still playing for championships, and most of the teams were the ones he was familiar with as being good teams when he'd left the country years ago. The editorial was about replacing hard helmets with some that had impact-absorbing materials on the outside as well as the inside. A couple of women came in, also wearing jeans, and approached the desk. They reported that their loads had been discharged into the holding tank and they would be on their way after they got some coffee. Neil stood as they approached and said, "Good morning. I'm Neil Campbell. I was told I might be able to find some work here." The short young blonde smiled and said, "You sure can. Have you got a truck?" "No, just a willingness to work. I was hoping there might be a truck here I could use." The stocky, matronly brunette with graying hair said, "Too bad. I think Jerome may be able to help you, though. He should be in shortly. He'll be empty in a few minutes." "Thanks, ladies." The women got their coffee in large insulated cups and went out the door. Neil sat again and began to look at the next magazine. Before he could get into it, however, a young man in his middle 20s wearing a leather jacket came briskly in. "Hey, beautiful, where do I go next? That hopper's getting low." "We got a call from a project near Dulles. They have some trees, brush, and stumps they want to get rid of. They estimate about a dozen loads. Think you can get some of that?" "Sure. Tell Bart where it is. Did we get any response from our availability notice?" "We did. That's him," she said, nodding at Neil. "But he doesn't have a truck." "Hey there, are you here to help?" the young man said, advancing with outstretched hand. "I sure am. What's needed?" Neil tried to match the young man's apparent enthusiasm. "We need another truck, but you can sure help even without it. You ever done TDP work before?" "All I know about it is that the letters mean thermal depolymerization process, and I only know that because it's on the sign there." Neil gestured toward the sign on the front of the desk. "But Enid Lee thought I could do the work, so I came out to do what I could." "Enid recommends you? That's good enough for me. Come on out to the truck, and I'll show you around." And he started for the door without even looking back. Neil caught up with him outside and asked, "Aren't you going to check with Enid?" "Jessica will do that. If Enid gives you the thumbs down, Jessica will call me, and I'll dump you out of the truck wherever we happen to be, and you can walk home from there." Jerome was grinning as if there was no way he thought he would need to do such a thing. Neil shrugged and moved right along to keep up with Jerome's quick pace. "Okay, here we have the input hoppers. Each kind of waste we get goes into one of the hoppers. The biggest profit is on the rubber and hard plastic, but we can take almost anything. That last hopper over there is miscellaneous. If it isn't right for one of the main hoppers, we put it in there. Naturally, that's the low-profit one because you can't really tune it. Of course, sometimes the residual non-organics we get from that one make up for the lower energy. Next, we have the grinders, where we shred the big pieces like those tree stumps we're going to get. Then the ground-up material is mixed with water to form a slurry that is heated under considerable pressure. This breaks up the longer organic molecules and kills anything that might possibly be alive in the slurry. That's how we can take even things like hospital waste that's contaminated with all kinds of bad stuff. We won't handle that stuff ourselves. There's a special truck for that. It wouldn't do to have that truck in an accident. These cylinders here are where the slurry is flash-dried to get the volatiles off. We use the natural gas from that to burn for energy to keep the process going. The excess from that goes to those tanks from which we burn it to make electricity, which we send into the grid. From the flash tanks, the remaining liquid and solid parts are sent on to the next stage, where they're heated even more. This dries off the water and separates the lighter oils from the heavier. Then the various parts of the organics are separated into various weights of oil and some gas. The result we pump into those tanks. We distribute a lot of it locally as heating oil in the winter and ship the rest off to petroleum refining plants. Of course, they don't do petroleum anymore since TDP plants like ours keep them busy enough. "So what we're doing is making oil out of garbage?" Neil summed it up. "Okay, yeah, you could say that. I like to think of it as recycling myself," Jerome grinned at him. "Yes, it does sound better that way," Neil acknowledged. "We do get garbage right enough. The trucks from several towns around here dump their loads in a miscellaneous hopper. But most of our source comes from the farms around here and the town sewage. That's why most of our trucks pump into tanks. We can clear septic tanks and liquid waste from farm animals with those. We have several trucks with regular routes to the farms. My truck is more a general-purpose dry organics truck. We get a lot of tree debris and construction site waste. The problem is usually getting the stuff into the truck. We have a small grabber for light stuff, but for something like big tree stumps, we have to coordinate with a pickup machine of some sort. Worst case, we can use the winch and an A-frame and lift it in that way." For the first time, Neil began to understand what it meant to be an independent worker. Jerome clearly wasn't expecting anyone to take care of things for him. He was viewing everything about his work as his own responsibility. "Ready to roll?" Jerome was already turning toward the trucks, one of which was his, presumably. Jerome's truck looked like a dump truck with a long bed. At the front of the truck, just behind the cab, was a small crane-like device with a set of claws on the business end. It appeared to be several years old, but other than some mud splashes, looked quite clean. It was obvious to Neil that this truck belonged to its driver. Jerome said, "Climb aboard," and swung quickly up into the driver's seat. Neil walked around the truck and did likewise into the passenger seat. It was quite comfortable. The truck was already running but made very little noise. There was no gear shift that Neil could see. "Back up, Bart," Jerome said, and pressed the accelerator, and the truck backed out of its parking place. "Tally-ho, Bart," and the truck moved forward. "Don't you have to shift gears?" Bart will do that for you if you tell him. Otherwise, you have to use the keyboard, but that's a pain. Haven't you ever driven a truck before?" Neil smiled and said, "Not like this one. I drove some light trucks over the last 15 years or so, but most of them required that I use a gear shift, what we used to call a standard transmission." You must have been driving something really old. Nowadays the computer does all the gear shifting. I just tell Bart when I want to forward or backward, and he does all the rest. If I'm coming to a big hill, or if there's something special about the cargo that Bart needs to know, I can tell him extra slow or something like that, but mostly Bart just does what we need. Neil thought they were going to replace the driver next, just like they did for the commercial airplanes. Bart, where are we going to get those stumps? A map appeared on the dash showing where they were and where they were going with the route marked. I'm surprised you still have to steer, Neil commented. In an emergency, Bart would stop the truck and get it off the road if possible, but there's just too much to take into account on these back roads. Some of those big interstate rigs go on autopilot for hours, though. Hardly seems worth it to pay those guys. They're mostly computer hackers anyway, I think. But we really earn our money with what we do. It's more than just driving, loading, and unloading? Where have you been, man? There's lots more to it than that. Every load's different. Some are high profit, and some are almost a waste of time. If I get a full load of old tires really packed in there, that load is worth maybe $100. The plant can process that old rubber really efficiently, and we get a lot of value from it. It costs us the gas for me to go to get the tires, but we get a lot more oil from those tires than they do from a load of hog or chicken waste. Then there's the time it takes me to get a load. If we have trouble with those stumps, I could spend all day just getting one load. If they have a lifter for us, we can do maybe 10 trips in one day. We can build up a backlog for that wood paper hopper that will take a couple of days to process. It really hurts to have an idle hopper. It reduces the efficiency. That's why we need a couple more trucks and drivers. Last week we had to shut down 2 lines for a couple of days. Makes you sick to think how much money we were losing. So I guess these stumps are just what you need, what we need. Only if we can load them quickly. I'll keep my fingers crossed, Neil grinned. When they reached the construction site, it looked more like a destruction site. Bulldozers and other large earth-moving machines had obviously been at work on what had been a forested area. There was a pile-up of branches and tree stumps. It looked like the logs had been removed, but all the branches and stumps had just been piled up to get them out of the way. Isn't that beautiful? Jerome crooned as the pile came into view. Clearly, where others saw trash, Jerome saw wealth. There's tons and tons of the stuff. Can we just take it? Neil asked. It isn't ours yet. We have to find the owner. They knew we were coming, so they should be somewhere around. Let's park the truck somewhere prominent and see what Bart can do for us. Jerome directed the truck to a spot with some elevation and a good view of the pile of debris. Okay, Bart, ask Jessica to send the owners to us. Is that all there is to it? That's easy. No, that's just the beginning. When the owner gets here, the real work starts. Bart Simpson's voice came from the dashboard speaker. Jessica says she's given them your location. They should be with you in about 20 minutes. Okay, that gives us some time to get our act together. Now, what we have to do is convince the owners that the smartest thing they can do with their pile of trash is to give it to us to convert to oil. What we have going for us is that the pay for oil is relatively quick. Within 6 months, almost every bit of the oil and gas and electricity we produce will be consumed and the benefits realized. Also, this eyesore pile of tree parts will be removed. The owner can be almost certain that they'll be paid for the oil since it has very little downside. On the pollution side, it's carbon that's already in the environment, so it won't add to the greenhouse. By making oil of it, we reduce the amount of oil and other carbon fuels that have to be produced from fossil sources. Since we make lubricating oil as well as heating oil and electricity, we get almost pure profit with low risk. Of course, if we were exporting this oil or shipping it across country, the risk would be greater since it might be spilled. But we can use just about everything we produce locally. The other side is what he can do with this stuff besides give it to us that'll make him some money. We know it isn't good for lumber since they already removed all the logs. They could use it to make dirt, but the payoff there is much later. In fact, it might be several years before they would get anything for having made the dirt. Anyway, we'll get quite a bit of fertilizer from the part that doesn't make oil or gas, and that's almost as good as dirt. The owner could give it to a different TDP plant, but we're the closest and we have a good return on investment rating. Wait, Neil held up his hand. What's that rating all about? Oh, that's an index of how much net benefit is derived from the resources invested. It takes into account both the material resources like the wood in this truck and the human resources like you and me. When you compare how much money is paid to the folks contributing to a certain project over a certain time period with the amount of resources it took to generate that pay, you get a pretty good idea of where to invest. I seem to remember from a college economics course that return on investment was the amount of money you got back for the amount of money invested. We can't invest money now, can we? So we invest tools, materials, and our own time and energy. We just updated the concept of return on investment to make it work for us now. For example, if your project has a real high ROI and you and some other project both want the same resource and their ROI is a lot lower, then the resource owner is almost sure to give the resource to you. It's like you were paying more for the resource back in the old days. Why do we need anything more than that rating? Neil asked. Come on, man, there's lots more to it than just averages. They're all from the past anyway. Circumstances change all the time. Different people may find different things to do with the resources. Somebody might get a great idea for something new to do with tree stumps or whatever. If you want to make good money, you have to stay on top of things. Now, this project here obviously has a lot of resources committed to it. That means that the folks who put it together have great reputations for getting the most out of resources. That means they're sharp and really on top of things. They may have some idea for what to do with this stuff that we never thought of. So what you're saying is that we need to sell ourselves and what we do to the owner so the owner will trust us with this stuff. That's the idea. We also need to find out about loading old Bart here. If they can help us load it, their profits go up. For the rest of the time before the owner arrived, Jerome showed Neil how to work the crane and claw loader attached to the truck. It turned out to be quite easy. Bart helped by not letting the crane hit the truck itself, and otherwise it was just like using your own hand. Neil put his hand in the control glove and watched the crane hand mimic the movements of his hand in the glove. He was able to reach down to the ground and pick up a stick no thicker than his thumb and place it in the far corner of the truck bed. He would have enjoyed playing with it longer, but a couple of people arrived in a small car. Everybody got out of their respective vehicles and introduced themselves. The owner was in her middle 30s and wearing jeans. Neil wondered if jeans were the new uniform for businesswomen. It turned out there was no need for a sales pitch from Jerome, as the owner had already decided to give them the stumps and brush pile. She and Jerome got in the truck, leaving the doors open, and transferred ownership of the stumps and brush to Jerome, complete with a camera shot of the pile and an estimate of its weight in wood. Bart confirmed the identities of all parties and registered the transfer. There were handshakes all around, and the owner got back in her car. Jerome asked if they had any equipment that could help load the stumps on the truck. It seemed they did, but it wouldn't be available until they quit work at dusk. Also, they doubted the regular driver would be willing to stay. Jerome looked at Neil. You don't happen to know how to drive that cat of theirs, do you? Neil allowed as how he had never used any such equipment. Jerome said that was okay. He would do that part. He asked if they could use the loader overnight. It was agreed so long as they gassed it up before they left. With that settled, Jerome and Neil got back in the truck. Are you up for some night work? Jerome asked. Well, I have nothing else on my agenda, so I might as well. Right, then let's see if there's anything else in the area nearby we could get, and then head back to the plant. Bart, ask Jessica what we could pick up on the way home. There was a pause, then Jessica's voice said, We still have some downed trees over in Pleasant Valley. They're on Grove Street. I'll tell Bart. Jerome sighed. Okay, it's tedious, but it'll at least pay for the gas. Bart popped up a map again, and they drove about 2 miles to another small town. Grove Street proved to have some piles of brush on the street in front of many of the houses. There isn't much weight to these, and they're tedious to pick up, but at least they're something. It should give you a chance to practice with a grabber as well. I'll steer, you grab. Load in the layers and put the bigger stuff in the middle. Invisible Hand, Chapter 22, Adjustments, in which we see how various people have adjusted to the change. January 18th, 2013. Damn potholes, they're all over the place. What did they make these streets out of anyway, graham crackers? They crumble the first time a bus or truck runs over them. People are giving me fits complaining about them, but what can I do? I can't order anyone to fix them. I have to wait for them to be fixed before I can pay. Sure, you aren't in charge, but have you made suggestions to anyone? Who's in charge of the streets? Who's responsible for seeing their maintenance? The Department of Transportation, I guess. But they're off in the state capital. They don't come down here to our town and drive down Main Street. Who's paying them? Maybe you could contact... No, they'd be paid by a group, wouldn't they? If they're that high up in the state government, it would take a committee to decide their pay, and there's no telling who's going to be on that committee until it's chosen each month. Have you been reporting the streets as being inadequate and dangerous? Sure, but it's like yelling in a thunderstorm. Nobody seems to hear me. At any rate, the streets aren't getting fixed. Are there any local companies that build roads or sell road materials? Maybe they could come out and fix the potholes. Wouldn't they need the permission of the DOT to close a part of the road and so on? If we pay for improving the streets and don't pay for police preventing their repair, who's going to enforce the laws about street repair? Good point. Let's look in the yellow pages and see what we've got in the area. Nothing under streets. Try roads. Nope. Maybe asphalt. Wait, it says paving. Let's try that. Bingo! Quite a few of them. All right, now we're getting somewhere. Let's call some of them and see what they can do. Hello, this is Angus Lander. I'm a payer responsible for infrastructure in this area. Can I talk to someone who can get some paving done? Infrastructure. That's things like roads, bridges, sewers, you know, the things we need to keep the town going. He'll do just fine, thanks. Mr. Markopoulos? Angus Lander here. I'm a payer for the streets around here, among other things. Could you tell me why there's so many potholes not getting fixed? I know they can't pay you, but that shouldn't stop them from asking you to fix the streets, should it? Well, it would be silly to ask you to bid on the job when you get paid for how much net benefit the work produces. I mean, whoever does the job first is the one who gets paid, right? Sure, I'll pay for whatever improvements you make. If the amount gets over $100, I'll have to bring in some other payers, you know. The more money, the more payers need to judge the benefit. But I'd say do the most important streets first, because that ought to produce the most benefit, wouldn't you? Okay, I think that's a good place to start. I'll meet you there. What time? 3 days from now. What takes so long? Oh, right. I understand. Okay, Friday it is. Well, that's one. Let's call a couple of others and see how that goes. Hi, I'm Angus Lander. Are you Mr. Markopoulos? Angus reached out to shake the hand of a slender man wearing a hard hat who had just stepped down from a truck that looked like it would be appropriate for street repair. Yes, sir, just like the shirt says. Could you show me some identification? Anybody could be dressed up like that. Sure, here's my computer. Tell him who I am, computer. The sophisticated, cultured voice of the actor portraying the computer intoned that this was one Angus Lander, whose assignment was infrastructure. I'll be damned, have you guys all got one of those things? Yes, it's how we keep in touch with the central accounting computer system. I can use this for paying small amounts of money. I can also use it to identify the people I'm dealing with. Computer, who is this gentleman? Angus said and pointed the camera lens at the face under the hard hat. This gentleman is Alvin Wesley Markopoulos, the computer responded. Okay, I guess you're a payer. How much are you going to pay me for having my crew fix this pothole? That depends on how long the patch is used and how much traffic uses this street and so on. I can't tell about the pay until after we find out how much good it does. If it's a good patch and this street isn't replaced and it has lots of traffic, you could be getting paid for this patch every month for 15 or 20 years. You mean I won't get paid anything for a month? Well, yes. We pay for these things once a month, so you'd get paid within a month. I think your first pay would be at the end of this month. That's only about a week away. How much will I get paid then? You understand that lots of people would be getting paid if we fix this patch. The folks who provided the asphalt, the folks who provided the truck, the rest of the crew here, of course, the secretary in your office, and so forth. Everybody who helped to get it fixed would be paid something. How the hell are you going to do that? Oh, the computer will take care of it. You've had a payer at the office, I'll bet, and there are payers who will know about all your suppliers. All that gets put into a complicated equation which shares out the money for the benefits that I observe. Of course, that's minus any negatives I observe, like your truck here is blocking traffic, so I'll have to take off a little for that inconvenience to the people who are trying to use this street this morning. And the asphalt could be used other places, so that's a cost as well. It's like when you had to pay your suppliers and your crew and your secretary and so forth back before the transition, only we payers take care of all that before you, so you don't have to bother with it. So how much are you going to pay me for this at the end of the month? Oh, maybe 25 cents. 25 cents? Are you out of your mind? I wouldn't spit on the ground for 25 cents. Now, wait a minute, Alvin. First off, you aren't having to pay anything for your house or your food or medical treatment. You aren't paying anything for your kids' education. So all this money you get for fixing this pothole you can spend on luxuries. Luxuries? How much luxury can you buy for 25 cents? Stay with me here now. It'll take you, what, about an hour to fix this pothole really well and to get onto the next pothole down the street there, right? So you should be able to do, say, 6 potholes a day. That's $1.50 for the day's work. But it's $1.50 every week and $6 a month and $72 a year for years for this one day's work. You won't have to lift a finger again to get that $6 a month. Now, let's assume that you work at fixing potholes all year long. That's an additional $6 for tomorrow and the day after, and by the end of the year you have, let's see, 250 work days a year at $6 a day. That's $1,500 a month or $18,000 a year for as long as those patches last. And you've already done the work. $18,000 isn't much for a year's work. But that's money that doesn't have to go for rent or food or insurance or any of the necessities. You can spend it all on vacations and golf and so on. And if you do a second year of work, you have $36,000 coming in each year. Well, after 5 years, you'd be making $90,000 a year to spend on luxuries. Of course, that's assuming that the patches you make last that long. If this patch lasts only a month or two, then you'd only get $1 or $2 for your work here. The longer the patch lasts, the more you get paid. Hey guys, we're going to do things a little different from now on. Come here, let me explain it to you. Saturday, February 25th, 2013. Ted, long time no see. How are you doing? You're looking great. Well, if it isn't John, good to see you, buddy. I am feeling great, too. What are you up to these days? The painting thing fell through. I discovered that as a hobby, painting is fun, but all day, every day, it gets old in a hurry. I hooked up with a construction firm doing road work. I've adapted some of our old accounting software to keep track of materials and equipment. With my software, we can tell who has what equipment and what materials and what they're going to need. It's working like clockwork. We get the best materials and get deliveries right away because they know we'll have money rolling into their accounts within a few days or a couple of weeks at the most. What are you involved in? I've heard you're getting to be a real mover and shaker. Well, I have to admit that things have gone rather well for me. You remember how I left the office back on New Year's Eve thinking it was the end of the world? Well, a few days later, Sally called me. Oh, by the way, Sally is still my secretary, and we still work out of the same office. Of course, we have several floors in the old bank building, but I haven't seen any real need to move to a different office. Anyway, one of the contractors to whom I used to loan money called to ask about who he could trust in setting up new deals. I'd always paid attention to whether people were honest in making loans because I figured if they would cheat the public, they'd try to cheat the bank too. I was able to put him in touch with some people I trusted, then several of them called to ask similar questions, and I mentioned a couple of opportunities I thought they might take advantage of, and before you know it, I was spending all my time in the office finding things for other people to do, and I was getting paid for it. I have 3 times the effective income now than I did before, and almost none of the expenses. It turns out that I had more than enough money to buy my home, and with no taxes, and no bills for either tuition or room and board at college. We saved a lot of money. Even my wife started doing some different work at the hospital, and her income is up as well. I guess you never know whether the change will be for the better or worse. Look, I got to run now, but keep us in mind if you need some road work done on any of those deals of yours. See you, John. Monday, March 18th, 2013. Frank, do you remember all that material on organized crime bosses that we collected last fall? Sure. We had them cold, and then we couldn't do anything with the evidence because they were getting oil for us on the black market. Well, what would you say to bringing it out of cold storage and using it now? I'd love it, but wouldn't that get us in trouble with the Washington guys? So what do we care what they think? They don't pay us or our staff, and they certainly don't pay the judges. I have to think that putting these guys away for their crimes might get us paid quite a lot, wouldn't you say? Let's ask Rodney. He's a payer. He should have some idea. Monday, April 1st, 2013. I don't know why we still come to work here. There isn't enough left of the Bureau to do diddly. We might as well just search for good-looking women taking off their clothes. Besides, I don't know where they're going to get any money to pay us. They keep saying that we'll get paid, but I don't see any. They haven't paid me either, but I'm going to keep coming to work as long as they'll let me. I have an idea. So let me in on it. I've been your buddy for years. I've covered your ass any number of times. You owe me. Yeah. I can't do it alone anyway, and I wouldn't have brought it up if I wasn't going to let you in on it. So give. What is it? Well, you know how these databases we tap into could be really useful to the payers, and the police could use them to solve a bunch of crimes. That ought to make the payers pretty grateful. And if that isn't enough, don't you think people would be pretty grateful if people like us couldn't snoop on them anymore without a court-ordered search warrant? Yeah, so what? So let's make this whole operation public. Let's blow the whistle on the agency and go public. How's that going to help? It'll just scare everyone. No, look, that's the beauty of it. No matter how they react, we get a boatload of money. If they see how useful this can be for law enforcement and convicting criminals and use it for that, then we get paid for that. If they want to shut it down right away, then we get paid for warning everyone of what's happening so it can be stopped. If they want to use it to make paying easier, and I think that's where the big money really is, then we get paid a fortune every month for the rest of our lives. We'll live like kings, better than kings. What do you mean, use it to make paying easier? How would it make paying easier? Don't you see? This system with a few extensions can keep track of what each person is producing. It'll end the squabbles about who's done what. It's able to follow every part and piece of every device and record how it's used. If Joe makes a widget and gives it to Pete, and Pete does something to make money with it, Joe can get a cut because the computer knows that the widget used was made by Joe. In other words, all the payer will have to do is say how much the benefit was, and the whole host of people who contributed something to help can be identified by the computer, and each paid their share. But it's not set up to do that. I mean, it collects a lot of data about lots of people, but there's lots of work that would need to be done on the database and on the software that accesses it, not to mention all the programs that give it input. That's okay. That's okay. It's the idea that counts. There are thousands of programmers who would be happy to put in those modifications. We just have to sell the idea to the payers. Wednesday, April 3rd, 2013. If we don't do something about this, other hackers or whoever will try to gain control of the money servers. Okay, I think we all agree with that. So how do we prevent hacks of the software in our systems? We already have one feature in place. That is, we insist that all the centers have the same software running. It seems to me that we must keep that and add further procedures. Agreed, but what procedures? I think the open software approach has a lot to offer here. If we publish the code openly to all who want it and let anyone who wants to test it and look for bugs and ways to break in, then we will be able to prevent most potential hacks. I think we gain more than we lose by having everybody know what the code is. I don't know. You're making it really easy for some hacker to see just how it all works. They can come up with a technique and test it all sorts of ways. But look at the help we'd have as well. Every person with computer skills would be able to help us find vulnerabilities. Can't you just imagine all the computer science departments having their students looking for bugs and ways of testing for bugs and ways to detect intrusions? And when we need to change the basic program, we can make the new code available to everyone to be sure the new code does what we think it does before we put it into production. So what you're proposing is that we make the code we run on the money servers into public domain software. That appeals to me because it makes everyone responsible for the programs we run. You don't get out of it that easily, Cindy. You're still responsible for the code you run on your servers. Just because somebody else messes up doesn't mean that you won't be blamed for using their buggy code. I know. But this way, everybody, at least potentially, can influence how the money is implemented. This keeps everyone involved and makes more people feel responsible for how things work. Well, I don't think open source will be a magic bullet, but I do admit that it would have a lot of advantages. But will they let us do it? Do any of us have the source code for the money programs? Well, I see that none of us has a copy. Perhaps someone in the pay organization does. Judy, Mark, Chan, do any of you know whether the source code for the money programs is available? No, we'll have to get back to you on that. Give us a few minutes. While we're waiting, folks, as long as we're going to use open source for the accounting programs we run, what about the programs that gather the input data for those programs? What about the database software that keeps track of all the products and so on? Shouldn't that be open source as well if we're going in that direction? Damn right! All the software the payer organization uses should be open source. Let us all know what they're doing with the information they collect on us. Hold on there. I don't want everybody able to look at all my personal data. He's not talking about your personal data. He's talking about the programs that gather it, store it, and make it available to those who authorize to have it. I agree with him. I want everybody to be able to see the code to make sure the wrong people don't get access to our personal information. Guys, as long as you're asking about the accounting source, ask about the rest of that source code too. You know, I'll bet the government has access to all the data the retail stores and credit card companies have collected on us over the years. They probably even have medical records and such. I've even heard rumors that they're using an elaborate spy system here in the U.S. Several of us have heard those rumors, Cindy. It seems to me the more of those programs we get as open source, the better we'll know what they've been doing to us. Oh, it looks like our payers have something for us. It's going to take some doing, but the folks in the Home Office say that it sounds like a good idea to them. They're going to ask for a vote on the matter with a full-size sample. They want you to explain as well as you can what you want to do by making the source available and how that will help. They also say there's lots of other software that they would like to do the same thing with if you think it's a good idea. Wow, jackpot. From what they say, they've recently gained access to some software, hardware, and databases that the federal government is or was using. They'd like you to recommend some people, computer experts, who could examine the code and determine what it does and how it might be adapted to be used by the payer organization. Good Lord, 1984. We're in 1984. What do you mean? The government was Big Brother, and now the payers want to become Big Brother. We're lucky to escape from the government, and now the payers are trying to put us right back in the same fix. Wait a minute. Be cool now. I read in 1984 when I was a kid. I don't see how it's the same thing at all. Sure it is. They can watch everything, and they can make us do whatever they want. How can they make us do anything? All they can do is pay. All they can do. Isn't that more than enough? The government was paying, and they had all the big companies under their thumb. They got legislation passed that they wanted and everything. Now the payers are paying. Don't you think they can pay for the same oppression and control of everybody that the government was paying for? Actually, no, I don't. They have to live among us, don't they? If they give me a hard time, I'll give them a hard time. It's not like they were anonymous or able to hide behind the walls of an estate. But they can pay the police to hold guns on you and make you do whatever they want. They can have the police make Congress their puppet. They can have everything their own way and crush anyone who opposes them. How many payers are there? I don't know, several million, I guess. What's that got to do with anything? Just go along with me here now, and I'll show you. Let's say there are 3 million payers now. How many payers would have to be in on this plot to make it work? I don't know. Geez, where do you come up with these questions? Let's say they need 1 million of them. Couldn't the other 2 million pay to prevent the police from forcing people to work? Couldn't they pay to defend Congress? Wouldn't they try to protect everybody from a totalitarian state? What if there were 2 million in on the plot? Then it's too many. Even 100,000 is too many. Wait a minute. You just said that 1 million wasn't enough. Now you're saying that 100,000 is too many. That doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. If they tried such a thing, they'd have to hide themselves away from the public, wouldn't they? They'd have to be able to defend themselves from the righteous anger of the public. That's far too many people for the police to defend. Unless, of course, they all got together in a group like a small city and isolated themselves. But then, all we'd have to do is turn off the computers for a while and they'd be powerless. Fellas, one of the payers put in, there's a much better reason why the payers would never try something like that. We're self-selected for wanting other people's approval. You don't get that unless you're nice to others. If you believe that, I have some land in Florida I'd like to sell you. Okay, so maybe they are trying to take over like the feds did. It's up to us to stop them by making sure the software won't let them do it. I doubt they'll all be computer gurus. We'll see. I have some bad news and good news for you, sir. Let me have the bad news. The good news can wait. Yes, sir. The imports of oil have dropped 30% from before the transition. We no longer have the under-the-table help of various organized crime figures. When there were those arrests of scores of prominent figures in organized crime last month, we lost any leverage we might have had with the crime families. I haven't heard about any surge in deaths due to hypothermia. How are people heating these days? That's the good news, sir. It seems that we've developed quite a high level of conservation since the transition. People are giving other people rides. Service stations are giving gas mostly to trucks, and people they know are using it for work. It's like every service station owner is rationing the gas they have. Also, we've had some businesses that were high energy consumers shut down since they were using more resources than their products were worth. The power companies are also rationing energy to homes. Even the rich can't buy more electricity since the utilities won't sell it to them. So how are we doing overall? Well, we're doing pretty good. We have lots more production of oil from waste products. The thermal conversion process plants are being built right and left. There's been a shift in production toward things we need rather than things people will buy. I mean, we had rationing right up to the transition, and we were rationing more things than they did back in the last century during World War II. But even without our being able to enforce rationing anymore, the people who own the goods we would ration are doing it without being told. So we're gaining on both fronts. We're reducing consumption and increasing production of oil and other products. I think a few more months of this and we'll be over the hump. So what do you recommend we do? Sir, I don't think there's anything we need to do. And I don't think there's anything we could do that won't happen anyway. So far as I'm concerned, the only thing my whole department is needed for is keeping track of what's happening. I don't think most of my staff, what there is left of it, will be paid for much of anything that's in their job descriptions. There are a lot of them who seem to be making good money by providing information on how to conserve and where resources are located and such. Actually, the information is mostly in the computer system, and any good hacker could get it without us. So that's more bad news. Sir, I hate to say it, but it's really good news that I'm almost out of a job. It means that the problems I've been battling the last 6 years aren't problems anymore. I don't feel like retiring, so I'll look for something else to do. Maybe something to do with international trade. Maybe we can trade some of our goods for oil on the barter system. Anyway, I've typed up my resignation and I have it here. You typed it up yourself? I had to. My whole office staff seems to have found other things to do besides take care of me, he chuckled. I'll be sorry to see you go. You've been with me for almost 6 years now. You may not have seen the last of me, sir. I may drop in to ask for your cooperation on some international trade deals. Best of luck to you and your wife. Sal, I only came down here for old time's sake. Don't talk to me like you owned me. Sorry, Barry, but I'm in a tough spot here. You certainly are. From what I hear, they have voice and video recordings of you ordering the deaths of several people. They also have the testimony of some of the guys who pulled the trigger, since they got them on video, too. Looks like you have a tough case to beat. That ain't the only thing. I bought half the judges in this state at one time or another, and now I can't even get a nibble. What the hell's going on? It's this money thing, Sal. The judges you want to buy would have to get enough from you to go abroad and be rich for the rest of their lives just from that one bribe. But most of them don't want to leave the country and their families for the rest of their lives. You see, they don't have much use for the currency you can give them without leaving the country. But that's perfectly good money, Barry. I ought to know. I laundered most of it myself. It can't be traced. I can even have it put into a Swiss bank account for them. Why won't they take it? Because any sudden wealth is very noticeable, Sal, and if they can't use the money for years, what good is it to them? It just isn't worth the risk. So why won't you represent me? Am I too good for you now? Sal, first off, you are guilty as hell, and they got you dead to rights. Second, I got to think of my reputation. Your reputation is what? A shyster lawyer who'd take any case if paid enough? No, Sal. My reputation is a lawyer who wins cases. I want those cases where some promising young go-getter is accused of a crime and there's reasonable doubt. I want those cases where the DA is going over the line and trying to help his case along by underhanded tactics. That's where the big money is now, Sal. What do you mean? Isn't there big money in defending somebody accused of murder? Not particularly. Not when the case is organized crime. We get paid for seeing that justice is done. We get paid for preventing an innocent person from being convicted. Somebody will get paid for representing you in court. They'll even get paid pretty well if they can find some holes in the prosecution's case. But they won't get paid the big money that keeping a young person productive who would otherwise rot in jail will bring. They don't get the money that you get for showing a prosecutor cheated to try to get a conviction of an innocent person. And as if that weren't enough, you have a reputation. If I continue to represent you, Sal, then your reputation begins to rub off on me. Other defendants will be afraid that I'll be seen as representing guilty scumbags. No offense, man. They'll want to be associated with lawyers who represent falsely accused innocents instead. You know, like the way Perry Mason only represented the innocent. What jury would convict a person defended by Perry? So how much money would it take to change your mind and represent me? Sal, I don't want to leave the country for good. My daughter's a senior at Swarthmore next year. I want to attend her graduation ceremony. My son's on his high school wrestling team. I want to see his matches. My parents are moving into a retirement home in Florida. I want to be able to visit them. I don't think you have the kind of money that it would take to get me to give up all that. I don't know if there's enough money in the world for that. I could see to it that you don't get to enjoy those things, you know, Barry. Really? How are you going to pay for that? What chance would you thugs have to get away with such a crime? Your euros or yen or whatever seem to have less and less value to Americans these days. I think a couple of months ago you might have pulled it off. Now, I don't think you'll have much of a chance. In a couple more months, I think you'll be laughed at. The police seem to have cameras and bugs everywhere these days. The only reason I can speak freely to you now about these things is that ours is a privileged communication, and the police are becoming very careful about people's rights these days for some reason. But what should I do? Hope that the lawyer you get is brilliant or that the judge has a soft heart, because you really don't have much of hope otherwise. You see, Sal, something vaguely approximating justice is coming into the world. I didn't expect it. I didn't want it. But it's here now, and as always, I go with whatever's best for me. Good morning, Your Honor. Glad to have you back. What will it be today? Just my usual haircut. No, I think I'll have the works today, Harrison. Give me a shave and hot towel in addition. I could use some soothing today. Yes, sir, if you'll just give me your glasses. The aged barber whisked the chair needlessly one last time and took the judge's glasses, placing them carefully on the counter in front of the wall-to-wall mirror behind the elevated chair. The judge seated himself comfortably in the familiar leather chair and was reclined, then a hot towel tenderly placed over the lower part of his face. The barber busied himself with smoothing the blade of his straight razor on the leather strop while humming quietly to himself. "Isn't it a bright and glorious day, Your Honor?" he asked as he removed the towel which had done its work of softening the beard and soothing the nerves. "Some might say so, Deacon, but though the day is cloudless, it's surely not a bright day for all of us." "Why, Your Honor, I can't believe a man as important as yourself, a Superior Court judge, would not see this as a bright day." "It's this new economy, Deacon. It used to be that I could make my rulings without concern for my pay, but only for the law. Now, as I make a ruling or pass a judgment or issue a writ, I have to be concerned with whether it will cost me money." "I don't understand, sir. How could your making a ruling cost you money?" the barber asked as he whipped up the lather with a brush and a cup and gently and smoothly warmed the judge's cheeks, chin, and neck with it. "Just to take one small example, a judge over in Carter County ruled that the police had to tell a man where his wife was. A week later, he found and killed her. He beat her to death while their preschool-aged children watched. The payers considered that ruling was instrumental in her death, and it will probably be years before that judge stops being paid less as a result. Then there are all these cases in which lawyers are asking to have their clients released from prison because they say the crimes for which they were convicted are no longer possible, like writing bad checks. If the judge releases them and they commit other crimes, the judge loses pay. If the judge keeps them in prison and they turn out to be model citizens there, then the judge loses pay. I tell you, Deacon, it's getting so every decision I make can cost me if I don't get it right." By now the barber was quickly and effortlessly drawing the straight razor along the judge's cheeks, keeping the skin flat and taut with the fingers of his other hand. "I know what you mean. When I was a young man, I made some foolish decisions, and they sure did cost me. Of course, when I was in prison, I did learn to cut hair. It was easier than working in the laundry. I was sentenced to 5 years hard time for having that little $10 bag in my car. After I got out, having done my full time, I was an angry man, a very angry man. I decided to get a job in a barber shop where that judge might come in and get a shave." At this point, the razor was sweeping smoothly down the judge's throat in practiced strokes. "I figured I could let that razor slip, just a little, mind you, and before anyone could do anything, that old judge would be dead right there in my chair." The last stroke made, the barber wiped the remaining lather from the judge's face and neck with a warm, damp towel, followed by a gentle drying on another warm towel. "But by the time I had gotten a chair and had a good enough reputation as a barber to get a judge to sit in my chair, not only had the old judge died of natural causes, in his own bed, mind you, but I had a family to support and children that needed me. So I never did even so much as nick a legal neck." The chair was moved to its upright position, and the judge, a little pale despite the warmth of the shave on his cheeks, said, "That's quite a story. How much of it's true?" "Not a whole lot, Your Honor, but then I didn't really take an oath to tell the truth when I agreed to be a barber." "You want the usual trim?" "Yes, Deacon." "Did anyone ever tell you that you preach sermons in the strangest ways?" "Oh, sir, I've been told lots of things. Barbers cut the hair of almost everybody, and if they talk, I listen. Besides, sometimes I even learn a thing or two." "Well, Deacon, I think I learned a thing or two today in a barber shop. One thing I learned was that it's a bright and glorious day." What do you think of the class so far? "It's neat, Ricardo. I had no idea there were so many kinds of liquor." "I bet you didn't know there were that many kinds of drinks either, did you?" "I knew there were a lot of drinks. I figured there'd be maybe a couple hundred." "Well, there are thousands." "They'd better be in the book, 'cause I'll never remember them all." "Oh, they are, but I still think you'll fail as a bartender." "What do you mean? I make a great dry martini. Dry as a desert." "Yeah, but you don't have good sense. You'd give drinks to a drunk until he passed out." "Well, it's his money. If he wants drinks, why shouldn't he be able to buy them?" "Jeff, what does a bartender get paid for?" "For serving drinks and keeping up the bar." "Is that all?" "Well, there's being a good listener." "Jeff, please remember that it isn't like the old days." "You're darn right, Ricardo. It costs a lot more for a beer these days." "Jeff, listen to me. It used to be that you were paid for how many drinks you sold and nothing else. Well, maybe a few tips for friendly service. But now you're being paid for the consequences of what you do." "Yeah? So how does that change anything? If I don't sell any drinks, I don't get paid. I bet that's still true." "Yeah, I guess you're right about that. If nobody uses your services as a bartender, I guess you won't get paid." "Ha! See?" "But, Jeff, what if you gave some guy his 5th or 6th drink and he fell leaving the bar and broke his wrist?" "I'd rush out and help him, of course." No, I mean, what would happen to your pay?" "What should happen to my pay? I served the guy, sold the drinks, he got a good feeling for his money. Why should anything happen to my pay?" If the drunk fell down because he was drunk, then you are partly responsible for his injury. If he can't work for a while, you get less pay for a while. If the guy needs medical treatment, then you'll be paid less to compensate for that. The mere fact that the guy is feeling significant pain will show up as less pay for you. Hey, that's not fair. I didn't push him. Just because he does something stupid doesn't mean I should suffer for it. He's a grown man. If he can't hold his liquor, he shouldn't drink so much. But, Jeff, he was drunk on liquor you gave him. If you hadn't given him the booze, he would have been sober enough to avoid falling. It's still his own fault for falling. Nobody made him drink. You allowed him to drink your liquor. You stood there behind the bar, and every time he asked for more, you gave it to him, even when you knew he was becoming drunk. Well, it's his money. If he wants to spend it to get drunk, what business is it of mine? Part of why you're getting paid is for taking care of your customers. If you help them do something dumb, you aren't taking care of them at all. I mean, you know that alcohol makes you stupid if you drink too much. So you know that if you give a guy too much to drink, he'll be too stupid to take care of himself. You need to do that for him. So are you going to take care of that guy until he sobers up and gets smart again? Are you going to stay with him every minute and carry him and hold him up when he falls and drive him home and be sure he doesn't pass out, vomit, and strangle? You going to do all those things? I don't think so. Jeff, you can't just give people all they want to drink. You know the alcohol makes them do dumb things, and they'll hurt themselves. You have to say, that's enough for you. Wait an hour when they've had enough. Otherwise, you know that sometimes they're going to get hurt. You mean I'm their nanny? You're their nanny if you give them enough booze to get drunk on. You're telling me that some guy who works hard all week comes into my bar and wants to have a few beers, and I'm supposed to tell him I won't serve him? Doesn't he have the right to buy liquor whenever he wants with his money? Sure he does, Jeff. He has every right to buy whatever he wants whenever he wants. But that's your liquor he's trying to buy. You don't have any obligation to sell it to anyone unless you want to. Just because some guy has money doesn't mean that you have to sell to him. It's your right to refuse service to anyone for any reason you like, or for no reason at all. You're nobody's slave. Okay, I don't have to sell. But what if this guy comes into the bar already a little tipsy? Are they going to blame me if I only give him one drink and then he gets hurt? The payers would blame both you and whoever gave the guy the other drinks, but mostly you because he wasn't as drunk when the other guy served him. Well, what if somebody wants to buy a whole bottle of scotch? That's enough to get anyone drunk. If they buy the bottle, I can't always watch what they do with it. No, you can't. So you'd better know that person well enough to know how they're going to use that scotch. If they take only 1 or 2 drinks a day, you're all right. If they drink it all in one afternoon, you're taking a big chance. Well, damn, everybody I know really well would take that scotch and get smashed, except maybe my mother. Then you better not sell bottles of liquor to anybody. You know, Juan, I thought the hard part of this job was going to be remembering how to make the drinks. Now it sounds like it's a pretty risky business. You've got to keep track of how many drinks everybody's had and everything. Like I said, Jeff, I don't think you're cut out for this job. Say, that bit about it being my right to refuse service to anyone. What if I won't serve blacks or women or Jews? Yeah, what about it? Isn't that unfair? Shouldn't a person be able to buy what they want, no matter what their race, creed, or color? Well, I think so, sure. But if you're forced to sell something of yours to somebody else, then you don't really own that something at all, do you? You've got title to it with the computer, so it must be yours. But if it's yours, can somebody take it away from you, even if you don't want to give it up? I don't think so. But you do admit it's unfair that just because you're black or whatever, you can't buy something that other folks can buy. Nobody said you couldn't buy it if you were black. It's just that you can't necessarily buy some particular luxury item from some particular owner. See, it's like this. Say some person has a store that sells jewelry. Jewelry's a luxury, right? Right. So you go into that store and you ask to buy a diamond ring, and the guy there says, "Get out of my store, we don't serve trash like you." Well, it's his store, so you got to leave. Hey, that's even worse. Why can't I be in the store? Because it's his store, dummy. Okay, so you're mad at him, aren't you? Damn right I am. I'd like to bust him one in the face. Well, sure, anybody would. So you tell a payer what a shit that guy in the jewelry store was and how he badly treated you. Why should I tell him? Is he going to beat up the guy? No, dummy, but he will see that the guy gets paid less than he would otherwise. Also, the people who gave those rings to the jeweler won't get paid for a ring you bought from him. They'll get paid for the ring you bought at the store down the street or off the internet. So if you make diamond rings, who would you want to have selling your rings? The guy down the street, sure. But what if the guy down the street feels the same way? What if all the jewelry shops refuse to sell things to me? What if the sky falls on you? Come on, Jeff, be reasonable. People can earn money selling you jewelry. You think there won't be lots of folks who want that money? People are greedy. You can depend on that. There's bound to be lots of greedy jewelry owners. Besides, if they won't sell to you, there must be lots of other folks like you they won't sell to. So you should go away to the jewelry store business and just sell to those people yourself, even if you have to make your own jewelry. You'd make a fortune. What if none of the jewelry makers will give me their jewelry to sell? What if you were making jewelry? Would you turn down a chance to have somebody sell your stuff? What if you were just getting started and trying to establish a reputation for things you'd made? Wouldn't you take a chance on some guy just getting started? Sure you would. I'm telling you, Jeff, human greed will guarantee that before long any bigot who refuses to sell to women or blacks or Jews or whatever will be out of business, because it'll cost everybody he deals with money for him to refuse sales to them. Being a bigot's a very expensive proposition anymore. But you can still refuse service to anyone? Sometimes refusing service is the smartest thing you can do. Sometimes it's really a dumb thing to do. If you can't tell when it's smart and when it's dumb, then you aren't going to make much money and nobody's going to want to work with you. You'll have to get a keeper to tell you what to do if you want to have a lot of money. I can't believe you're that dumb, Jeff. I'm not dumb. I'm just lazy. I don't want to have to think that hard. I don't want to have to pay that close attention all the time. Then you have to choose, don't you? You can choose to be lazy if you like, but it's going to be expensive. Invisible Hand, Chapter 23, At Work, in which Neil works with Jerome and a truck named Bart and finds out how to make oil. Loading the bundles of branches, small logs, and twigs did rapidly get tedious, but by the time he had the truck loaded, he had gotten pretty good with the grabber. He discovered that if he gripped too hard, he broke the branches and some fell to the ground. If he gripped too loosely, he could drop the whole bundle. A couple of times when he dropped the bundle, Jerome gave him a look, but since Neil jumped out of the truck and reassembled the pile for a second try, Jerome didn't say anything about it. Back at the TDP plant, they backed right up to the cellulose hopper, said, "Dump it, Bart," and the back of the truck came up smoothly, pouring the wood into the hopper. There was a rather loud grinding noise that was quickly muffled, and their load disappeared through the rather large hole in the bottom of the hopper. Jerome then drove the truck to a row of trucks near the office and pulled it into line with the others. They got out, and Jerome put back on his leather jacket. "Can I offer you a lift to town? I'm going that way anyway, and it'd be easy to drop you off." "Thanks, I sure could use the ride. I don't know when the next bus comes by." They walked over behind the office building where there was a parking lot for cars. Jerome went right to a rather impressive-looking sports car whose doors opened at their approach. Jerome says, "Get in. I think you're going to like this ride." Neil got in and almost felt the car enfold him. The door closed itself and the seat adjusted itself to his body so he couldn't feel any pressure points. The seat was pleasantly warm and the armrests also automatically adjusted to the position of his elbows. Jerome slipped in and said, "Okay, Don, we're going by Neil's place first." Neil felt the tiniest of vibrations and the car seemed almost to levitate in a smooth acceleration out of the parking lot. So far as Neil could see, there was no steering wheel and no pedals. Jerome had a grin on his face as the car came out of the lot onto the highway. Then Neil felt the back of the seat press suddenly on his back, and the countryside seemed to shoot back on either side. It seemed only a few seconds before the car slowed and went through the middle of town at a sedate pace. Several boys followed them for a while, and when the car turned into Neil Street, they took a shortcut. By the time Neil was out of the car, they had come running up. "Can we see the car, mister?" was said in all sorts of ways. Jerome said to Neil, "I'll be back to get you around 6:30. We should be able to get several loads of those stumps tonight and turn in around 3 a.m. "That suits me fine. I'll be ready." "You do have some work clothes, don't you?" "Not for this kind of work. Why?" Neil asked. "You can probably pick up some rough and ready clothes downtown if you get there before closing. There's a standard store just beyond the grocery." "Thanks. I'll check in there right after I get a snack." Jerome gently moved the car through the growing pack of children and drifted quietly around the corner onto the highway. Neil ate quickly and went to town to find the standard store. Once in the door, he found whites in all sizes and many styles. He picked out 2 pair of heavy-duty work pants, some work shirts, and a warm jacket. Then he went to the shoe section, found a pair of work boots that fit pretty well. The store also had toiletries in the kitchen section in which he recognized the style of plates he had found in his own house. He started toward the door with his armload of clothes and was stopped by a middle-aged man whom he assumed was a clerk. "Where are you going with that stuff, mister?" "I was going to take it home and put some of it on. The other set I was going to wear tomorrow." "Who are you and where do you live?" I'm Neil Campbell, and I live over on Maple Street in Sam Witherspoon's house. I'll be happy for you to examine my references. Have you a computer handy? Right over there, the clerk motioned. The TV was on the counter in front of the toiletries section. Before the clerk could say anything, Neil said firmly, "Jeeves, tell this man who I am." "Very good, sir. This gentleman is Neil Campbell of Aldie, Virginia. He is currently working with Jerome Small at the Aldie TDP plant. He is expected to return to work in 48 minutes. His current account balance is $84,503.28. Will there be anything else, sir?" Neil thought, sometimes it's really fun to have a valet. "That will be all, Jeeves." "Very good, sir." The clerk had not been expecting such a performance and was psychologically off balance. "Well, I guess it will be all right this time, but next time, check with me before you start to prance out of here with an armload of clothes." "I shall be happy to cooperate with you in every particular," Neil intoned, adopting just a hint of Jeeves' tone of aloof superiority. Neil managed to suppress a grin until his back was to the clerk. Hurrying home, he was able to get the new clothes on before he realized that he had forgotten to get a belt and long socks. Hoping that nothing would happen to his only belt, Neil put on 2 pairs of socks and the boots. Jerome was right on time, and Neil brought a box with several sandwiches which had exhausted his supply of bread, and several small boxes of milk and juice, which took a lot of his breakfast supplies. "Good thinking, Neil. Now we can share and get a little variety." Jerome showed an insulated container in the back of the car which had room for the drinks Neil had brought. As they drove sedately through town, Neil asked Jerome how he had come to have such a car. "I saved up and bought it, of course. How else would I get it?" "No, I mean, this has all the appearance of being a very expensive car. How could you afford it?" "The only thing I spend money on is this car and a few clothes." "That's all?" "Well, maybe a few dates, but I find the car itself is enough entertainment. Girls really love it, and if I drive up to a cafe in this car, I get really good service. It also got me that truck I'm driving. The guy I got it from must have thought I was going to make him a millionaire," Jerome chuckled. "Doesn't that put a lot of pressure on you to earn quite a lot of money with that truck?" Neil suggested. "Well, yes, in a way it does. But I only have to earn a little more than the usual for a truck of this type to keep my reputation. I don't have to earn as much as that fellow thought I would based on this car. Since I work harder than anyone else at the plant, I figure I should be able to beat the average pretty easily. Besides, this is a quick-paying job, so that guy has already gotten paid some for having given me the truck. It isn't as if he paid anything for the truck himself. What he's getting now for it is pure gravy." "Speaking of getting paid, how does that work? I mean, who pays me?" "For this particular job, it'll be a joint payment. That is, 2 payers will collaborate on the amount. They'll each be getting information about the job from the other, and using that confirmation, each will be able to do a quick run-up of the net benefit. The payer at the building site will be giving slow pay. That is, you won't get much at any one time, but it'll last for years. The payers at the TDP plant will be paying much quicker. The contribution of the wood to the oil flow and fertilizer and such will be generating benefits rather quickly, which should last a couple of years. The electricity on the grid is pretty standard since all the electrons are about the same, so a kilowatt here and a kilowatt in New York both get the same pay. The oil is a little different since we dispose of most of that locally, at least in the winter. In the summer, we send most of the oil to a refinery, which is kind of like the grid, so that's pretty standard and takes only a few months to pay out. The winter oil is the fastest pay, since keeping houses warm is a benefit that's realized right away, and the heating oil we produce here is burned within a few weeks." "Yes, but who is the person that actually does the paying?" "Oh, well, the construction site payer was the guy that came over with the owner. He noted the transfer and saw the condition of the site and will know what would have happened to the site if the stumps were just left there. He should have already done the entry of the benefit and the rate of depreciation and under what circumstances the benefit would have ended. So if something happens to him, another payer can step right in and make our payments for that site. At the plant, we have 3 payers since the plant runs all the time. They record who brings in what loads, the weights and materials brought, the trucks used, and so forth. They also keep track of the amounts of the various products and where they're sent. Some of the payers at the destinations pick it up from there for confirmations of arrival and consumption." "You know, it sounds just like the kind of information they always used to keep in the old days. They were always checking inventory and shipping invoices and such. I assume the payers use computers for all this." "Sure, doing it on paper would be a lot more work." "So the computer network is aware of the flow of all the goods and all the work that's going on all the time." "Don't give me that religious stuff. Computers are no more aware than those tree stumps we're picking up," Jerome scoffed. "Then why do you call your computer here Bart?" "Well, I have to call it something so it can tell when I'm talking to it and when I'm talking to you." "Yes, but you gave it a human name instead of a number or something like that." "But that doesn't mean it's aware, even if the computer does talk like Bart Simpson. It's just a computer and it isn't alive." "Who said it was alive?" Neil said, surprised. You said it was aware, and that means alive. You sounded just like those religious nuts who say the computer network is a living being. They're like something out of a scary sci-fi movie. All I meant was that the information was in the various databases and could be accessed at any time. Computers aren't alive, for goodness sake. Neil tried to put reassurance in his voice. Jerome's reaction to his comment had given Neil another bad turn. If the computer system itself was the agency that was controlling people, if it had escaped its human control, that would explain why Neil was unable to identify the people behind the tool. If the system that could so easily be used to control people had come to have a mind of its own, and worse still, a will of its own, then the problem was more serious than he had thought. Still, from what he knew of computers, granted that it was many years out of date, there was no way that the computers could be intelligent enough or wise enough to take over for themselves. Of course, 15 years was a long time in computer evolution. Perhaps by some fluke or accident. No, that was just not possible. It had to be impossible. By this time, Jerome had arrived at the stump dump. There was the promised front-end loader. It was rather substantial a piece of equipment and, as such, very valuable. It somewhat surprised Neil that Jerome would be trusted with it. What if someone else came along and drove off with that thing? It wouldn't let them. It's expecting me, and only I can drive it. Now who is talking like the machines were alive? Neil laughed. You got me on that one, Jerome grinned. Okay, we'll take the easy ones first, the ones that are kind of by themselves. Then we supplement with branches until we have a full load. I'll put the first stump in the back and the second in the front. While I'm getting the second, you fill in around the first stump with branches. Then while you pack the second stump, I'll strap the first and so forth. Ready? Well, let's roll. Jerome parked the truck near two rather outlying stumps, but within range of a large pile of brush. Then he took off his leather coat and put on a somewhat battered heavy white jacket that was behind the seat. He was already wearing his boots and white pants. Then he went to the loader and climbed into the cab. The machine quickly and efficiently approached, grabbed, and lifted the first and larger of the two stumps. Then it swung round and approached the truck from the back and almost gently placed the stump in the back of the truck. Neil began grabbing clumps of brush and limbs and stuffing them in the back corners and around the sides of the stump so it wouldn't shift when going over bumps or around corners. Jerome soon approached from the side with the second stump, and Neil hurriedly moved his grabber arm out of the way as the stump was lowered into the front of the truck body. Then Neil resumed tucking branches and brush around the stump, working from back to front. By the time he finished, Jerome was already almost finished attaching straps over the top of the load from the sides of the bed of the truck. There were take-up wheels just under the bed into which the ends of the straps were fed, and they took up the slack. Back in the cab, Jerome told Bart to get going, and the truck slowly wheeled back to the road. Jerome used the drive back to the plant to describe how the truck and the loader had communicated and adjusted the load so it would be properly balanced and centered. In the old days, it would have been just drop her in and let her rip, Jerome commented. Now we won't be more than 2 to 3% off the same weight on every wheel. They expect the trucks to last years longer. They backed the truck up to the hopper, and Bart released the straps, rewinding them, inclined the bed, and slid the whole mass of tree parts into the waiting hopper. Neil was expecting a loud noise, but instead there was nothing except the crunch of the wood itself. Is it broken? Neil asked. No, but it is night, and people don't want that kind of noise at this time of day. We need to put the sound blocker on. Jerome approached a TV attached to the side of the hopper. Okay, Snarf, put on the lid. That's all we have this load. A large, thick cap lifted up from behind the hopper and settled down over the opening, completely blocking it. Neil put his hand on the hopper and could feel strong vibrations, but there was almost no sound. How do they make it so quiet? Well, they have anti-sound generators, you know, speakers that make a sound that cancels out the sound of the stumps being chopped. It's just a large scale of the anti-sound systems on Bart and Darling. It takes some electricity, but it's a lot cheaper than the reduction in net benefit would be if we blasted the neighborhood with sound all night. Let's get another load. After several more loads, Neil and Jerome had become a smoothly functioning team. On their way out to get the last of the night's loads, Jerome drove Bart over to the other end of the plant and asked for some diesel fuel. They were directed to some 50-gallon drums, and Neil loaded 2 of them into the back of the truck with the grabber. They only asked for a full tank for the loader, but I like to give a little more than expected. Leaves a good impression, you know? Jerome explained. Bart, 100 gallons of diesel for Matilda. How much do you need? 57 gallons. To the pumps, Bart. The truck obligingly maneuvered next to the fuel pumps, and Jerome filled his tanks. Bart wasn't really thirsty, but I always like to start the day with the tanks about full. Bart, will you need servicing tonight? No servicing recommended at this time. After the last load of the evening, Jerome said, I'll pick you up at the same time tomorrow. I think we have about 3 more nights of stumps, and that ought to about do it for the cellulose for a few days. Then we can split our shifts so you drive Bart half the day and I take him the other half. Think you can learn it by then? I'll certainly give it a good try. As the days went by, Jerome lectured Neil on what kinds of loads were high profit and what low. He talked about efficient paths between jobs and where there were no full loads to be had from any one place. He also mentioned scouting on numerous occasions. It seems that one of the things Neil could do was to find additional sources of organic materials to be run through the process. In the afternoons before Jerome came by to pick him up, a group of boys would assemble to see the car. One of them was the boy from the grocery store. From him, Neil discovered that a lot of the area farmers visited the store. Neil soon took to visiting the store and striking up conversations with the farmers. It was only a few days before he had several leads. In one case, it was a cow killed by lightning. In another, it was some worn-out tractor tires. Cleared brush came from this farmer and a torn-down old barn from that farmer. By the time the stumps were all processed into oil, Neil had established a set of clients for his services. He found that he could often fit the small amounts of trash the farmers had into not quite full loads he was assigned by Jessica, who notified him of bigger sources. In this way, Neil managed to almost always have a full load when he arrived back at the plant. It was as a result of these contacts with the farmers and their discovery that Neil was living alone that he found himself invited to Sunday dinner on a farm. Neil decided that it was worth the risk that the farmer had a spinster sister to get a chance to explore how the transition had affected farm life. He was also getting rather tired of the bland standard food.
Thank you for attending today's presentation of Invisible Hand by Larry K. Mason, brought to you by GayTalkRadio.org and QueerPublicRadio.com. We hope you will join us this coming Monday as the story continues at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. In case you've missed any previous episodes, you may listen to them by visiting QueerPublicRadio.com or by visiting Mr. Mason's website at www.nopom.info. That's www.nopom.info. All the best to you and yours.